Welcome to the Little Victorian Boy Podcast. I'm storyteller Little Victorian Boy. The story you are about to hear was inspired by suggestions from my Patreon members. If you'd like to be a part of the Little Victorian Boy creative process, go to patreon.com/littlevictorianboy. Well, let's get to the story. This story is called March Madness. The Botanical Gardens of Hershey, Pennsylvania are a peaceful place. A place where plants thrive, young children play, and elderly couples walk hand in hand. And if you're an elderly single, Marvin Bulldog, the kindly groundskeeper, will hold your hand and listen to your stories about the war or the gum you used to chew, really whatever. He's a very nice guy. The most excitement the gardens get is the occasional Amish youth on Rumspringa breaking in to have unprotected sex in the Japanese gardens. But that's pretty typical for a botanical garden in Pennsylvania. No, the gardens were never too exciting and never on the forefront of anyone's mind. Well, that is until one March in 2007, when the world went mad for the Hershey, Pennsylvania Botanical Gardens. To understand what happened in 2007, one must travel back 100 years to 1907, when a wealthy steel baron named Richard Desk got in a philanthropic duel with fellow steel baron Frumpton Dungswallop. They were rivals, you see, both disciples of the capitalist philosopher Louis Cardpipe IV, and both became titans of industry by crushing labor unions and bribing public officials, both foreign and domestic. But the turn of the century brought a new game for the old rich and the new, the game of charity. Rather than raising wages and improving working conditions for their employees, the wealthy owners of industry competed in who could donate the most to cultural institutions that the wealthy enjoyed going to, like the symphony or the opera, or in the case of Richard Don't Call Me Dick Desk, the botanical gardens. Richard founded the Hershey Botanical Gardens with the intent of making it the crown jewel of Pennsylvania. This botanical garden is a seed that will grow this city into a cultural hub. Before the end of this century, Hershey shall host a World's Fair and will grow larger than New York, Paris, London, and Cairo combined, he screamed at the ribbon-cutting ceremony. But unbeknownst to Mr. Desk, Frumpton Dungswallop had secretly built a slightly larger botanical garden just across the river in Wormleysburg, and shocked the social elite with his own ribbon-cutting ceremony the very next day. This botanic garden is big boy, bigger than Hershey, more plants, more glass dome, more! Spit Frumpton Dungswallop in between bites of a roasted blue feather pheasant, a bird that would go extinct later that year. The two battled each other for the next decade, trying to find more and more exotic plants to fill their botanical gardens. One would get a Sri Lankan withering daisy, the other would get a European fighting moss. The next would import an African bird swatter, and the other would counter with Canadian goose-eating ferns. Richard even had to cut wages for his staff in order to keep his addiction to philanthropy. But no matter what he did, Frumpton Dungswallop would go slightly bigger. But in 1914, a discovery was made in Australia that would finally settle this rivalry. A living seed to a once-thought extinct plant known as the British corpse flower was discovered at an Australian estate sale. You see, the last British corpse flower was destroyed in the London fire of 1666, but a preserved seed of that flower had been hidden away by Edward Hyde, chief advisor to Charles II. Hyde soon went into exile, taking the seed to France. Upon his death, both the corpse seed and Hyde's corpse were returned to England, where the seed passed through the hands of many noble elites before ending up in the pocket of the Marquis of Buckingham. Quite literally, in fact. He liked to carry the seed around in his pocket for good luck. But it didn't bring him much luck when the Marquis was pickpocketed in 1786, and the seed was thought to be lost forever. It wasn't, of course. It was in the hands of a pickpocket who didn't know the value of the seed but kept it as a token. It was small enough that he even was able to stow it away on his person after being arrested in 1787, and he carried it with him when he was shipped to a new penal colony in the aptly named Botany, Australia. There, the seed stayed in obscurity until an Australian biologist named Tisley Dilsdale happened upon it at an estate sale while antiquing. An auction was held among the world's botanical gardens for the seed, and both Richard Desk and Frumpton Dungswallop attended with the sole intention of finally outdoing the other. Quickly, the other bidders dropped out as Frumpton and Richard drove the price up far beyond what was reasonable for a single seed. $1 million, $10 million, and finally Richard Desk screamed, $100 million! A hush went through the crowd. $100 million going once? Going twice? Sold to Richard Desk, steel baron of Pennsylvania. In order to afford the seed, Richard had to sell his steel plant, his mansions, his artwork, everything he owned, save for the botanical gardens itself. But he had won. He had outdone Dungswallop. His chief botanist planted the seed. Soon it would grow into a magnificent British corpse flower, and the whole world would flock to Hershey to see his triumph. But it never grew. The seed sat dormant under the soil. Desk became a laughingstock. He was financially ruined and soon sold the gardens to Dungswallop of all people. In desperation, Dungswallop let the gardens sit and decay, a final insult to his beaten rival. Of course, plants aren't the only thing to decay, and Dungswallop would die the next year choking on a turtle-shelled possum, the last of its kind. The garden, just like the seed, would pass through many hands before eventually being taken over by the Hershey Township's Society of Nice Things to Do during the day. The seed sat underground for 93 years, but in March of 2007, it sprouted. The seedling was discovered by the kindly groundskeeper, Marvin Bulldog. "That's a funny fellow," he said while inspecting the sprout. "Seems like I can seize it growing." He could. The seedling grew at an exponential rate, and within a week it towered over the groundskeeper. Serrated leaves as wide as Hyundai Sonatas stretched outward from a single stalk, and at the top rested a bright red bulb, bigger than the Liberty Bell. After consulting a biologist from Penn State and the town's historian, the Society for Nice Things to Do during the day realized that they had in their possession the most valuable plant in the world. Given its growth pattern, it was scheduled to bloom on March 31st, the first time a British corpse flower had bloomed in over 400 years. Local news picked up the story. Then it went national. Then international. Flights to Pennsylvania skyrocketed in price. Hotel rooms throughout the state sold out in a matter of minutes. All the world's wealthiest paid a small fortune for the chance to see the British corpse flower bloom in person. It had been rumored that if you smell a blooming British corpse flower, you experience a pleasure greater than 1,000 orgasms. It was a once-in-a-dozen lifetimes opportunity, and no one wanted to miss out. The Society for Nice Things to Do during the day kept watch of the flower as it grew to gargantuan size. The roots cracked the foundation as the plant stretched outward, occupying the entire east wing of the gardens. The red bulb grew to a size larger than a man, almost scraping the ceiling of the domed glass greenhouse. Most of the plants inside were relocated, making room for seating for the world's elite. The ticket sales would fund the Society for Nice Things to Do during the day for the next century. It was time for the big day, March 31st. The chairman for the Society of Nice Things to Do during the day greeted an assortment of royalty, celebrities, tech titans, and the just plain rich. They each crossed the threshold of the greenhouse doors, the place where poor Richard Desk proclaimed that one day Hershey would be the center of the world. He was right, of course, but he was dead. Once everyone made it to their seat inside the greenhouse, the doors were shut. Crowds gathered on the hillsides, watching the plant through binoculars and telephoto lenses, while TV crew helicopters recorded from above. There the wealthy sat as symphonic music played, and just as the sun began to set, the voice of Ludacris called out, "She's bloomin'!" The bulb began peeling open, bright red petals curling away, revealing the secret of the British corpse flower. An audible gasp was heard through the crowd as they gazed upon the naked body of celebrity chef Gordon Ramsay. There he was, emerging from the center of the flower. No, he was the flower. Just like the bird of paradise flower resembles a hummingbird, British corpse flowers resemble a wealthy British man, and in this case, it was Gordon Ramsay. The naked Gordon Ramsay flower stood there glistening in the last rays of the setting sun. But as the light faded, the Gordon Ramsay body began to bloat and turn a foul gray color. Then, just as the sun set completely, his belly skin burst open, spewing forth an immense cloud of pollen. The smell was unbearable. Crowds raced for the doors, but they pinned themselves in as the doors opened inward. Not very safe, but what do you expect? It was built by a steel baron in 1907. As the wealthy began inhaling it, their pupils expanded, and they started foaming at the mouth, screaming and spitting as they began tearing their clothes off, possessed by the flower pollen infecting their brains. The crowds outside watched in horror as the world's wealthiest and most powerful people stripped themselves naked, piled on top of each other, and engaged in a super orgy. The mountain of humans grinded and gyrated for 2 days in the shadow of the decaying corpse of Gordon Ramsay. By the third day, the pollen had worn off in their bloodstream, but the sex mountain would continue for several hours after. It's hard to just get up and leave casually when you're involved in something like that, especially when you're making love to both a Saudi prince and the members of Blink-182. So, to make it less awkward, people just kept going for a while. But we all get hungry, even the rich and famous, so eventually everyone climbed off each other and left, trying not to make eye contact too much on the way to their limos. And there, under that pile of sex, was left a mucus-covered seed pod. No one involved remembers how it was formed, or if they do, they don't want to talk about it. But there it was. The pod contained 12 new corpse flower seeds, and the Society for Nice Things to Do during the day planted those seeds, each a year apart. And in the year 2100, the first of those seeds is scheduled to bloom. I hope you enjoyed March Madness, a story by Little Victorian Boy, and thank you to all my Patreon members who gave me suggestions that inspired this story. If you'd like to make suggestions for next month's podcast, join the Patreon at patreon.com/littlevictorianboy, and you'll also get a bonus monthly podcast as well as a bunch of secret content. It's great. It's like a fun, cool, exclusive club that all the best people are a part of. I'd really appreciate it. And if you like to, follow me on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube. It's at Little Victorian Boy for Instagram and TikTok, and Colin Stanley for YouTube, and you can see a whole bunch more content just like this. Thank you, and have a great day.